Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're decoding an ancient but insanely effective leadership preparation model. When we hear the name Moses, most of us immediately picture this majestic prophet, right? Parting the Red Sea, staff in hand. But today, we're actually going to look at him through a completely different lens. We're going to look at him as an extensively trained executive. We're breaking down the exact curriculum that shaped one of history's most influential figures, and we'll uncover how those exact same principles serve as a literal masterclass for modern leadership.
Now, we live in a culture that absolutely loves to glorify raw talent, the whole overnight success thing. We tend to think that if you just have enough passion and enough drive, well, you can lead anyone to do anything. But we really need to bust that modern myth right here, right now. Based on the material we're analyzing today, passion is simply not enough. True leadership, it requires rigorous, intentional preparation. In fact, God's sovereign plan for Moses didn't just rely on some divine calling out of nowhere. It involved decades of structured, highly demanding training long before he was ever handed any significant responsibility.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Preparation beyond just passion. 2. The Egyptian royal classroom. 3. The power of exposure. 4. How experience shapes the heart. 5. Being a teachable, lifelong learner. And finally, number 6, your leadership development blueprint. We're diving into the 3 E's of the Moses model: education, exposure, and experience. And stick with me, because by the end of this explainer, I promise you're going to walk away with a highly practical 12-month action plan to apply this exact blueprint to your own life.
Okay, let's jump straight into part 1. Preparation beyond just passion, the foundation of a leader. To really get this, we kind of have to look past the big spiritual milestones for a second and focus on the developmental ones. Moses was placed in an environment that gave him access to opportunities that most people of his time literally couldn't even imagine. Actually, Acts chapter 7, verse 22 serves as a perfect thesis statement for us today. It says, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. This is a huge clue. It shows us that Moses was already an influential, capable, and highly educated leader way before he ever stood in front of that burning bush. His development was incredibly intentional. So, what exactly did that education look like? Well, that brings us to part 2, the Egyptian royal classroom, mastering the skills of administration. Growing up as an adopted prince in Pharaoh's household meant he was getting one of the finest formal educations available anywhere in the ancient world. And it's fascinating because his ancient curriculum translates perfectly into modern leadership skills. Let's break it down. First up, reading in hieroglyphics. This gave him the modern equivalent of clear communication and record keeping. And a leader has to communicate clearly to build trust and preserve a vision. Next, government and administration. Look, vision without administration is just chaos, right? Moses learned organizational skills here that he later used to organize the entire nation of Israel. Then there's military strategy. This taught him logistics and strategic preparation, which equipped him to respond wisely to massive challenges. And finally, math and engineering. The Egyptians were master builders. So learning resource management and large-scale project planning in Egypt, that directly translated to how Moses later oversaw the incredibly detailed instruction of the tabernacle. Honestly, he learned to build pyramids so he could manage the building of a nation. But, formal schooling is really just the first pillar. Let's move on to part 3, the power of exposure, broadening the vision. An education that's confined entirely to a classroom is, quite frankly, incomplete. The environment a leader is placed in plays a massive, totally irreplaceable role in their overall development. Living in that royal palace meant Moses wasn't just, reading scrolls all day. He was witnessing a global superpower in motion. He was exposed to different cultures and societies, complex leadership structures, the stark contrast between extreme wealth and severe poverty, international diplomacy, and large-scale national management. This exposure blew his worldview wide open. It expanded his vision far beyond the crushing, immediate limitations of the slavery his people were enduring. He saw firsthand how the world actually operated at the highest macro level. So the crucial takeaway here is how we define the second pillar. Exposure is the process of growing by seeing, learning, and experiencing diverse people and situations to expand a leader's vision. Because you can't just read about leadership in a book, right? You really have to see it in action. You have to understand diverse perspectives to truly grow your capacity to lead diverse groups of people. However, even with the best education and world-class exposure, it still wasn't quite enough. That brings us to part 4, experience shapes the heart, the wilderness practicum. God knew that academic knowledge alone required a wilderness practicum to truly prepare Moses to lead a fractured, difficult nation. And that brings us to a massive, defining number: 40. Moses spent 40 years as a shepherd in the wilderness of Midian. This was his mandatory, deeply humbling practicum. Think about that for a second. After 40 years of living as a prince, he spent the next 40 years tending sheep. Talk about a reality check. This brilliantly illustrates a completely necessary balance. The palace provided education for the mind. It gave him knowledge, confidence, and administrative capability. But the wilderness provided experience for the heart. It taught him the humility, the patience, and the absolute dependence on God that the palace never ever could. A complete leader requires both things: the sharpened mind of the palace and the humbled heart of the wilderness. And let me tell you, when we miss this balance, things go wrong fast. Leaders start making some huge mistakes. They start believing education alone guarantees success, or they simply refuse to learn anything new after hitting a big goal. They ignore practical experience, they reject advice from others, they get super arrogant about their academic achievements, or they end up depending entirely on their own knowledge instead of God. These are such dangerous traps. If you only have the palace and you completely skip the wilderness, your leadership becomes arrogant and, honestly, incredibly brittle. And avoiding those traps requires becoming what we see in Part 5, the teachable lifelong learner, humility in leadership. True humility in leadership means the preparation phase never actually ends. Even when you become an established, peak leader, the learning has to continue. Our source highlights what we can call the Jethro principle. So later in his life, when Moses was successfully leading the Israelites, his father-in-law, Jethro, noticed Moses was heading straight for major burnout by trying to do absolutely everything himself. Now, instead of pulling rank or letting his ego take over, which he easily could have done, Moses humbly accepted Jethro's organizational advice to delegate responsibilities. It's a great reminder. True leaders listen, adapt, and delegate. The very second you start to think you know it all, your leadership growth immediately stops. This whole idea is just beautifully anchored in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Wisdom is supreme. Therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. It doesn't matter what your current level of success is. It doesn't matter your title or your past achievements. The relentless acquisition of wisdom and understanding is completely non-negotiable. Okay, so how do we actually do this? Well, it is time for Part 6, your leadership development blueprint, putting the plan into action. We're going to take these pillars of education, exposure, and experience, and we're going to turn them into something you can literally start doing today. Let's look at how this builds into a highly actionable 12-month development plan pulled directly from our source material. Step 1. Read 3 leadership books. This is your foundation, your palace education. Step 2. Attend 2 courses or seminars. Step 3. Meet regularly with 1 mentor. You need to find your Jethro to guide you. Step 4. Intentionally develop 1 new skill to expand your administrative capacity. And finally, Step 5. Gain 1 new hands-on ministry or service experience. This right here is your wilderness practicum, ensuring your heart grows right alongside your mind. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this one lingering question to reflect on. Are you intentionally investing in lifelong learning? The Moses Blueprint shows us that education opens doors, exposure expands your vision, and experience develops your wisdom. So don't just rely on your passion. Put in the preparation, embrace the wilderness, and never, ever stop learning.